Well, with that, so I'm here with Meghan Cummings, Executive Director of the Women's Fund of the Greater Cincinnati Foundation. I've had the pleasure of being able to work with Meghan for the past few years in my role here with REDI. An absolute pleasure. Meghan, if you can, let's start with you telling us a little bit more about the Women's Fund and your work in the Cincinnati region.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me today. And I've appreciated our partnership over these years too. So it's wonderful to continue the conversation today. So the Women's Fund, we are part of the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, and we work on women's economic self-sufficiency issues within the Greater Cincinnati region. And we do this at a systems level, which may be a little unfamiliar to some of your listeners, but unlike a nonprofit that produces programs or serves women individually, we're really looking at the ecosystem of the whole region. So how do we produce research that digs into some of our region's most complex issues? How do we catalyze the community around this research so people can take meaningful change in their own institutions? And how do we drive systemic change around the issues affecting women's economic self-sufficiency? And our goal with all of this is to create a region where women can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential, because we know when women are activated in our region, everyone benefits. So we put them at the center of our work, but we really want this to be an economic engine for all of us.
Thank you, Meghan. And I'm gonna piggyback off the last statement you made, and I'm gonna jump around a little bit from what I originally had. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna focus a little bit on the Employer Toolkit.
Sure.
So the Women's Fund, you do have an incredible toolkit for businesses. And when I talked about, I'm gonna kind of piggyback off that last statement. Yes, I know geared towards women, but it actually affects a broad spectrum of people. So can you tell us a little bit more about the Employer Toolkit, how it came to be, and what's in it?
Sure. The Employer Toolkit is just an exciting project that we've been working on for about 4 years now. We actually never set out to create this toolkit. We were involved in another project called Raise the Floor. It was a partnership with 4C for Children and Gateway Community and Technical College and a few employers and others in Northern Kentucky and Boone County. And this project was meant to get more women into manufacturing careers. When we started that project, there were about 600 openings of manufacturing jobs in Northern Kentucky. And as your listeners know, if those jobs aren't filled, they can't take on more work, which hurts us all. So we really had this idea that we would get more women trained and interested and employed at these different manufacturers. And we had some success in doing that and meeting the additional holistic needs they would need to be successful in these jobs. A few months after the first women were placed, they weren't lasting. And we had some conversations with the CEOs and HR folks at these companies to say, what's going on? Why aren't they not succeeding? Are they not trained well? Or what else do we need to be doing? And the HR managers say, these are some of our best trained employees. But the issue is we have a 90-day probationary period where, although you're accruing PTO in that first 90 days, if you were to miss a day during that, it's really frowned upon, and you would earn like an attendance occurrence with that. And it makes us question your commitment to the job. So here we have these companies in a very tight labor market when we started this, that were finally getting more people to fill these jobs. We're investing the time and the money to train them. And then this one policy that they couldn't take any time off in that first 90 days was really running counter to their goals as a company. So we put a pin in that and we thought, might this policy be creating an unintended negative consequence for the workforce and against the company's goals? And so we started with that 90-day policy that was ultimately affecting single moms that had a sick kid within that first 90 days. And we broadened it to think, are there other very concrete policies that companies can be aware of to help them improve the outcomes in their companies? For many companies, they were struggling with attraction, retention, and engagement. We heard these words come up from every company interview we did. So we really focused on those pain points of the companies, and then how can we reimagine their workplace policies to be very inclusive of people across the socioeconomic spectrum. So most of our policies and practices and benefits at our companies were created by and for middle and upper class folks. And really, we need to have a new eye to how those policies affect frontline workers. So over the years, after talking to dozens of employers and employees, we came up with the Employer Toolkit, which is a collection of about 60 policies that might have this unintended consequence for employers. And it's a searchable database meant to help employers retain their frontline workforce. And you're right, it works for men and women. It works across geographies, whether your company's small or big. There's something in it for every employer.
And these policies, these HR policies, correct me if I'm wrong, but a vast majority, if not all, were written by legal HR expert. Is that correct?
Yeah, when we identified kind of what the policy was that needed to be changed, and we did that from a ton of research and a ton of interviews with employees and employers, we had some major buckets, some around transportation, some about childcare, one about both flexible and predictable scheduling. There were so many different components to this, but when we actually wanted to write the policy that would be handbook ready for an employer, we had a lawyer, an employment lawyer, help us with all those. So the idea is if a company finds a policy that they want to implement, they can literally cut and paste it right from the toolkit, make some minor adjustments for their work environment, and it's ready to go. We want to take all those barriers away for the employer.
And that's what I love. So not only does the toolkit provide solutions, because everybody can gab about the challenges, but nobody's providing solutions.
That's
You
right.
provided a toolkit that says if you have a problem and you are willing to be innovative or creative, here's a solution. And not only here's a solution, but like you said, it's handbook ready. Plug it out, pull it out of ours, put it into yours. It's plug and play. So
That's right.
Again, something that I think the Women's Fund of Greater Cincinnati has done to benefit the Greater Cincinnati region as a whole. Very impressed, have always been very impressed with that.
Thank you. It's getting a lot of traction. We've worked with the Federal Reserve in Atlanta to present this to their business community. We've certainly worked with other resources in Cincinnati, the Workforce Innovation Center in Queen City Certified, to make sure these policies get a lot of exposure. And we want to see as many companies adopt these policies because not only is it good for business, but it's great for families too, and your employees, and that has a broader effect across our community. And businesses can be a really critical partner in changing the outcome on a lot of these big, complex problems that we often think are disassociated from business, like poverty alleviation. Companies can have a huge impact in that.
So that actually serves as a good segue into the next question about employers being good partners. So we've seen some concerning data around women and men leaving the workforce due to COVID. Could you explain why that might be and how employers could better support men and women during these unprecedented times?
Yeah, it's been a very, very concerning year, Adam. Just as we were making some meaningful gains in women's workforce participation, not only were all those gains erased, but add a few 100,000 jobs to those, that erasure. It's been a very, very tough year. So a few things happened. I think we had a perfect storm that happened with COVID, but I want to go back to pre-COVID, and we can't paint this rosy picture of what was going on pre-COVID. It's just that COVID exposed the inadequacies with the system, right? So we failed the stress test when COVID came along. A few of the things that were already volatile is that we have a disproportionate number of women in low wage work. Not only women, but women of color and people of color in low wage work. So when this pandemic hit, it had a disproportionate effect on already the most vulnerable in our society. So a lot of women comprise that low wage work. Childcare is just this issue that as a society, we need to take much more seriously. Childcare is an infrastructure issue, just like roads and our legal system and any other, part of our society, we really need to get better at making childcare accessible, quality childcare, and affordable. So I think in those first, month or two of COVID, what we saw was childcare was put to the brink. Either childcare centers were closing down due to safety concerns, or their ratios were drastically changing because of safety concerns. We saw kids home from school. Certainly that was the case with our own son. All of a sudden he's at home, and thankfully I had a professional job that moved pretty seamlessly to home, but many essential workers, if you're in healthcare or working at the grocery store, there was no chance for that. And then that is paired with generally, especially in a two-parent working family, generally the woman is making less than the man. So you have this like pressure cooker situation that if that childcare is needed at home and mom's making less than dad, mom dropped out of the workforce. So that's happened in many cases. Other times, if you're a single working mom, that was in an essential role and now kids are home because school was transferred remote, they just really didn't have a choice except to cut back those hours. And additionally, if they were workers, if they were bartenders or waitresses or something that was kind of frontline in those hospitality industries that closed early on, there was this immediate need that they could not cover their basic expenses. We were talking to women in April of 2020 that had no idea how they were going to pay rent in May 2020. So I think when we have this preponderance of low wage work in our economy, about a third of our jobs in our region don't pay a living wage. When all of a sudden those jobs are cut off, you just don't have a safety net. So I think there was a confluence of factors that happened earlier in COVID that help us understand that we absolutely must reimagine our economy in different ways as we move on from COVID. It wasn't working before. We failed the stress test, and now we need to reimagine and have really bold ideas for what we can do next. So we're never in this situation again.
That was almost too much good information for me to even follow up on. So I'm going to let that stand as it was. Very, very well put. And so let's shift now. You talk about, all right, we do need to, it wasn't rosy before. We failed the stress test. We still need to come up with solutions. Not everything's been fixed. And I know that, and this isn't to put you on the spot to say, what have you done? But I know you do more than the Employer Toolkit. That is one facet of many things that you do. So aside from the Employer Toolkit, could you tell us about what other programs you currently offer?
Yeah, sure. So we think just in general for the Women's Fund, we think women need to be involved in the places where all decisions are being made. So we really work to get women's voices elevated, and not just women's voices, but making sure that all voices we don't usually hear from, folks that are, making minimum wage jobs, folks that are dependent on public transportation, we think their input is critically important, that we can't possibly make broad, well-informed decisions about anything unless we have all the people at the table who are affected by said decision. So this crosses a lot of areas for us. So on the toolkit, we talked about, how do we get more worker voice in these policies? What will really help frontline workers? We have a program called Appointed, and Appointed gets more women appointed to civic boards and commissions across our region. So many of your listeners might be familiar with nonprofit boards or corporate boards. There's another group of boards called civic boards and commissions, and these are appointed through your government, your mayor, your city manager, other elected officials. And they make really important decisions about all matters across our community, from zoning regulations to mental health services to the quality of water in our communities. There's really a broad expanse. There's over 300 of these civic boards and commissions in our 8-county service area. And what we found when we audited these boards and commissions is only about 30% of all the seats are held by women. In fact, in one of the counties we serve, only 12% of those seats are held by women. And we think women need to be at these decision-making bodies, and women of all races and all experiences need to be at these decision-making bodies. So we created a database where people can sign up, tell us about both their professional and their lived experience, and then we monitor all the vacancies on these boards, which until we kind of came into the game, they were pretty kind of well hidden on different pages. I don't think intentionally, but it was just hard to kind of get who was recruiting at what times. So we made this very transparent, and appointed is, for lack of a better word, it's like eHarmony for civic boards and commissions. We want to make it really clear how we can connect qualified women to these leadership opportunities in our community, because it's really important that their voices are at the table. So we've been working a lot on Appointed, and our goal with Appointed is to reach gender parity on all these boards and commissions by 2030. So we have about 9 years and I think we'd be one of the only regions in the United States that have put such an intentional effort on reaching gender parity on those boards. So that's one really big project we're working on right now. And again, it's about getting broad voices at the table. We know businesses make better decisions when their board of directors are diverse and when their management's diverse. And government should be the same way. We can make decisions that are better for everyone in our community when all those voices are at the decision-making table.
So let me ask you, and I told you I was going to jump around a bit. Based on what I just learned about Appointed and knowing what I know about the Employer Toolkit, if companies have questions, if they want to get involved, if they want to either get involved in being a partner for Appointed somehow in some fashion, or they want to utilize the Employer Toolkit, what should they do next?
Yeah, sure. So we would love to connect with companies, and companies can be involved in so many ways, as you mentioned. They can, take practices from the Employer Toolkit and put those into play. They can recruit people from their company to join Appointed. We did a call with a major local company last week to train some of their employees to get involved in Appointed, because that's a wonderful way for their voice to be louder. I would just say that, some of these issues we have going on in our community seem overwhelming. They seem so complex that it kind of feels like, how could I ever make a difference with just my employees and just my company? And I have to say, you can choose that next path that leads inequitable practices in the dust. We can create this next chapter that is very inclusive and equitable and give you wonderful business returns as well. So you can get involved through our website, CincinnatiWomen'sFund.org. We love talking to companies. We will talk to any company, whether they want to understand our latest research or add their voice to our advocacy efforts at the city or state or national level. There's room for companies to do that as well. And if you want to do some more internal work, have you looked at your own pay equity in your company? Have you diced those numbers, making understanding for gender and race together? Do you have pay equity in your own company? That's a really important place to start, to know if your pay practices are fair where you are. So I think there's been a lot of reflection after COVID, and then the racial awakening we had last summer. And we saw many companies coming out and making statements and saying this is wrong, and we want to craft a different future. And many of those practices can start right in your own building. Are you looking at your own pay scales? Are you looking at how you promote people, whether it's based on potential or performance? Have you looked at the use of your benefits by band in your company? If you have a great benefit, say you're offering wonderful health insurance, and you look and find out that only 9% of your frontline employees sign up for health insurance, well, it's great that you offer that, but that's not really accessible. Your tuition reimbursement, who's taking advantage of that, and really looking at all levels of your company to make sure those benefits are not just accessible, but that are promoted with folks across your company. Those are not easy. Those are changes that your company can make to be part of the solution in crafting this new future.
So I'm going to go into my last question here. Every conversation, nearly every conversation I have with an employer ends up being, I can't find people, where can I find people, so on and so forth. I had one very interesting response or comment that an employer stated they were being hit with the quinfecta.
Quinfecta, please tell me, what's the quinfecta?
Exactly, the first time I had heard this, the quinfecta.
Sounds
so the
dangerous.
First is tax returns, pandemic unemployment, stimulus checks, spring break, and marijuana.
Well, well, that's
that was my reaction.
Quite the combination, Adam.
They said that's what's preventing us from finding people. That quinfecta, and I thought, okay, wow, I didn't put them all together like that. And actually, one or two wasn't even on my list. So I'm always trying to think about, okay, well, where are you searching for people? I'll always make recommendations to, disability employment services. I usually ask about second chance opportunities and niche talent pools. What I heard here during this interview, though, was also, if women were the low wage earners and they were the first to get out of the labor force,
yeah,
they sound like an opportunity. Sorry, I don't mean to typecast, but women sound like a great opportunity where employers should be looking. So if you had one takeaway for companies and thinking it through that lens somewhat, what would that be?
Yeah, I think if you want different results, we have to have different practices in our companies. And I think most employers have come to this realization that employees are not going to come to their door perfectly formed and have perfect attendance and transportation and childcare worked out every single day and can work the same shift every day. I mean, we have to, just as we'd have a growth mindset in leadership, we have to have a growth mindset in our HR policies. And I'm not for 1 second saying it's okay if people just don't come to work. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we have to work harder as employers to understand our employees and their very specific needs, and then help to understand how we can transform our policies, that those needs can be met and they can work. So, I'll give you one example. This is from the toolkit. I love my 401k, right? GCF invest in that. That's wonderful. I have that privilege that I can plan ahead to retirement. But if I had to choose every day between investing in my 401k and putting dinner on the table for my family that night, I would choose the dinner every night of the week. And many local employers are realizing that they have employees, they're not able to meet their basic needs. And we have to understand that they can't fully perform for your company if they're worried about putting food on the table for their family that night, if they're worried about how they're going to afford that bus fare to get to work, if they don't know where their kids can be after school because they can't afford childcare. Those are things that might not be the company's fault, but there's the company's problem, right? And I think we can have really productive bridges from this current cycle, this vicious cycle we're in, where we hire people, we train them, they have an absence, they have a couple absences, they're absentee, we have this scramble to fill their role, then we have to go through another hiring procedure and then a drug screen and a background check, which has a concrete cost, and around we go, and that costs so much money. And it's not a valuable use of money, right? It is hemorrhaging time and energy and talent and money for no good outcome.
Yep.
And I would love for companies to embrace a virtuous cycle where we are hiring people, we're understanding their needs, we're adapting our policies so we can better meet their needs, we're growing along with them, and they feel a sense of ownership in the company. And then what do? They produce quality, consistent results, which isn't that what we're all looking for?
That's
and
right.
Then hopefully they stay, and then their families get more economically stable. And I would posit to the employers listening today that those two cycles cost the same amount of money. One is just this invaluable cost of turnover and lost talent. And the other one is using that same money to really invest in what our employees need to succeed. It is very rare for me to talk to a frontline employee that doesn't want to succeed and do a great job. They really do. That is 99% of the people I talk with. They want to perform well. They want to have the dignity that comes with work. And they have very complicated lives as well. Yeah. And the employer can be a hero in that cycle and understand that. And I think when that is invested in, you'll see incredible loyal and productivity that you wouldn't see elsewhere. So for your employers that are struggling with attraction, what's that work environment look like for your employees? And are you a worker, or are you an employer that understands their needs outside of work too? I guarantee that will produce some better results.
And as you said, keep them there. It'll impact retention.
For sure. Yeah. And wouldn't it be great to promote from within, where people already have that institutional knowledge of your processes and your customer and your services? I mean, that's always a better way to go. So I think there's a virtuous cycle that I hope many companies embrace in this recovery. I think it's the path forward.
Well, Meghan, this has been a phenomenal interview. One more time, if companies want to engage with the Women's Fund of Greater Cincinnati, how would they do so?
Yeah, start at our website, see what is interesting to you. It's CincinnatiWomen'sFund.org. Please reach out to anyone on our team or myself. I'd be happy to talk with you and figure out how we can be partners in this. We love working with employers, and they're a huge path to how our region's going to be more prosperous for everyone. So we're happy to have those conversations.
Well, fantastic. This has been great. It's always a pleasure when our paths get to cross.
Absolutely.
And I always look forward to it. Thank you, Meghan.
Me too. Thank you.